Friends, in this episode, I plan to talk about negotiation. Now, negotiation is a vast subject. There are whole books written on it. Institutions, training academies run courses on negotiation that last 3 weeks or 6 weeks. So, covering this in a short episode is perhaps not so easy. There was a view that negotiation was primarily a written process. This was said by Harold Nicholson, for example, in the interwar years. But then, if we go back earlier to the 18th century, 17th century, Italians, French experts on the diplomatic process thought of negotiation mainly as a verbal process. And if we fast forward to today, we find that negotiation is first a verbal process, but of course the end product of negotiation, an agreement, a treaty, a document, will be a written document. So it is, as usual, a combination of both. So let's first talk about some theory aspects of negotiation. Negotiation involves a process to decide on something that is in dispute, something that is contested by two sides. Now, there are two concepts relating to negotiation that are important. One is called ZOPA, Zone for Possible Agreement. That is the area between which a settlement is possible. The maximum demand of one side and the maximum demand of the other side. There is also another concept which is BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What it really sets out is the bottom line, that neither side will go below a certain amount. Supposing we are considering two sides, two countries are negotiating a river water sharing agreement. One side says, right now we don't get very much water from this river, and we insist on getting a minimum of 35% of the total river flow, annualized over a 12-month period. The other side says that whatever happens, we must at least get 60% of the water. So the zone for possible settlement is somewhere between, looking at it objectively, between 60% and 65%. So one side gets its 60%, the other side gets its 35%. That 5% is the zone within which an agreement is possible. Now, there are many theories of negotiation, but one of the neatest, one of the best, one of the most clear is one put forward by Fisher and Ury in that well-known book, Getting to Yes, about which I have spoken earlier. What they present in that book is the notion of an agreement that is integrative, a settlement, a process that integrates the views of the two sides, as distinct from one that is positional. A positional situation is when one country is fixed on a particular number or a formula. Supposing there is a boundary dispute, one side says, whatever happens, we will not give an inch. Well, then in a sense there is nothing to negotiate. So a positional doctrine is really the antithesis of a negotiation process. Now, Fisher and Ury put forward 4 very concrete ideas which can be applied. 1. Separate people from the problem. That is to say, look at the problem that is at the core of the negotiation process. Don't look at positions taken by X or Y leader in the past. All that is known, but that is not the core issue. Second, find common interests. Even behind positions that seem to be opposed to one another, there are often some shared common interests. Sometimes they are not visible, you have to search for them. The third point is look for creative options. Don't just think inside a box. Try and think outside a box. And I'll come to an example. And finally, find joint criteria. That is, ask the other side, what are the criteria, what are the conditions along which a settlement might be reached? So let us jointly find those criteria. Now, one of the best examples is the Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1999. That agreement, the creative element is that the two sides worked out a formula for the present time. And then they said that a final settlement of the Anglo-Irish dispute will take place sometime in the future when mutual confidence has been built. But that final settlement must take into account 2 relatively contradictory elements. The one is that all people of Ireland desire unity, including Northern Ireland. And the other element, that Britain has a permanent interest in a part of the territory, meaning Northern Ireland again. So now 21 years have passed since that agreement was reached, the temporary agreement, which found a working method for the two sides in Northern Ireland to establish a joint government. That was after decades of warfare, decades of terrorism, and all kinds of activities. It seems to have held. Now, we are not anywhere near a final settlement. Neither side is, neither Britain nor Ireland. But both sides feel that they are building up a certain amount of mutual confidence. There are other examples. Between India and Pakistan, it was Pakistan's leader, Musharraf, who said that anything not acceptable to India is off the table. And equally, anything not acceptable to Pakistan is off the table. So, in the 2-3 years before President Musharraf was overthrown by his own armed forces, as it turned out, the two sides had come fairly close to some kind of a working formula. We don't know exactly what the formula is, but people have spoken about it. The main personalities on both sides have given some information. And again, Musharraf seems to have been overthrown by his own armed forces because they did not really want a settlement. All right, I've talked enough of theory. Let me now talk of the process of negotiation. We can divide up the process of negotiation, and this is my second big point, into 3 stages. The first stage is the preparation. The second is the actual negotiation, and the third one is the follow-up. Now, in the preparation stage, one has to make sure that you anticipate everything that is likely to come up during the negotiation. You constitute a team, you constitute a whole procedure through which you will obtain approvals for the negotiation process, and you try and anticipate the ZOPA of the other side, the BATNA rather, the BATNA of the other side, which will give you a possible zone for possible agreement. The BATNA of the other side will be the absolute rock bottom beyond which the other side will not go. Similarly, your own BATNA, you should know, even if you do your utmost to make sure that the other side doesn't come to know what your BATNA is. The actual negotiation. The actual negotiation involves opening statements, it involves the initial sparring, the initial jousting between the two sides, and that is the stage of careful listening, constructive listening, where you know the basic position of the other side, but you pay attention to every single detail that the other side puts across, because that will sometimes give you some hints of what might be a possible eventual approach that the other side will take, including possible concessions. Active listening is actually the right phrase for this process. You then have an exploration time. You explore options, and very often this is done in informal settings. You may even have a young member of the delegation who buttonholes a counterpart from the other side, and he says, look, let's leave aside the positions of the two sides, we know them. But he says, supposing you and I were the delegation leaders, what do you think? What are the kind of ways in which we might possibly find a way to a settlement? Now, these are all trial balloons, these are informal discussions, and they are part of the process through which the search is carried out. If one is successful, a possible formula does emerge, and all this hinges on building mutual confidence. Now you say, confidence? How do you build confidence when the two sides are opposed to each other? The positions of the two sides are in contradiction, yes. But as individuals, the one should be able to trust the other. The leader of the delegation on each side should feel that that person, although his views are those of his country, but that person is an honorable person. That person will not tell me lies. If I ask that person a difficult question, he may turn around and say that you realize that I can't give you an honest answer to that question, so let's talk about something else. But confidence between delegations, between delegation leaders is possible, can be done. And supposing one is successful, you move on then to the process of detailing, packaging, etc. of the agreement, the fine-tuning, and even finally writing out of the draft. But if you don't agree, then there is also a procedure that is worthwhile, and that is to record in joint minutes the stage up to which the discussion had progressed, so that the next time when you resume after 6 months or a year, you know what were the limited points on which there was something like a shared position. What were the criteria, for example, that each side had put across, and what were the possible areas in which there was concurrence, similarity between the two positions. And the final stage, if you have an agreement and it's all neatly done and worked out, is the follow-up of the agreement. A good agreement has the follow-up built into the agreement, so that there isn't likely to be dispute over what should be the follow-up action jointly to be taken. And equally on each side, when you get back home, when the delegation comes home, you need to find a practical way in which you communicate to all the stakeholders, including your people, the public, what are the results of that negotiation. Robert Putnam put across a very interesting concept called the two-level game. And what he says there is that while your negotiation goes on in the conference room of the two sides, where the two sides are meeting, there are the publics of each country who are another audience in the negotiation. And at some point you must make sure that you also communicate with the publics. That is the second level to which he refers. There are examples where two countries have come to an agreement but have failed to convince their own people that this was a good agreement. So, whenever you can, in whatever way that is practical, one has to keep alive an open line to one's own publics. My third and final point. I will talk only now about some practical issues. The most important of these is work out a process for your negotiation. Ambassador Tommy Koh of Singapore has some excellent advice. It consists of 8 points where he sets out the kind of formula that applies. Form a team, trust your team, appeal not only to the intelligence of the other side, but the emotional intelligence of the other side. Use advisors, including foreign advisors, but use them wisely. There are other ideas that are offered by Tommy Koh and other people with vast negotiation experience. One of them is understand the culture box of the other side. That is to say, understand what is the broad framework within which that other country operates. Now, I talked about Fisher and Ury and the notion of integrative bargaining. You may say, what happens if I take a holistic, integrative view, but the chaps on the other side, they are not like us. They have a very rigid perspective. Well, the Kellogg School of Management carried out an experiment in the year 2007 to see what would happen if one side was using an integrative approach and the other side was taking a positional approach, an old-fashioned approach of just going hammer and tongs without bothering to understand the perspective of the other side. They found that even in those situations, with only one side taking the approach of integrative bargaining usually works far, far better. That is to say, it is not enough to say that I am going to be very open-minded, but it's the other guys who are bloody-minded. No. An open-minded approach will work even in situations where the other side is rigid. There's another way of looking at it, and this is the golden bridge idea. The golden bridge idea is that, look, I can't come to an agreement until I find a way of solving the other side's problem. Because the agreement is not about me and myself. It involves convincing another side. So let me, for a moment, imagine that I am also interested in finding a solution to the bottom line, to the interests of the other side. How do I creatively build a golden bridge that permits the other side to get to its goal? And while doing that, I make sure that my objectives are also met. Again, it's another way of looking at the same issue, which is that if one is interested in a resolution of a difficult situation, you have to think of it as a two-sided process. It is not simply where I win and the other side loses. I have to be able to find a way that also allows the other side to win in the process. So these are some ideas about negotiation, and we will continue our dialogue with another episode a few days down the road. Thank you very much.